Good morning. I'm Scott Ream. I'm a senior counsel at the Constitution Project. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here today, both those in the room and everyone else who's joining us via webcast. A few quick preliminary words on logistics. If you haven't registered for the event online or signed in at the registration table just out here, please do. Materials packets, which include bios for all of today's panelists, are available at the table. For those who want to follow the conference on Twitter, we'll be using the hashtag GitmoMedCare. That's GITMOMEDCARE. We'll also be taking questions for each of the panels throughout the day using that same hashtag GitmoMedCare. I want to start by thanking Global Lawyers and Physicians for co-sponsoring this conference with us, and in particular their co-founder, George Annis. I also want to thank Drs. Sandra Crosby, Gerald Thompson, and Steve Zanakis, who, along with George, were instrumental in organizing the conference today. We would not be here absent their tireless dedication and tremendous expertise. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Constitution Project, we were created out of the belief that we need to cast aside the labels that divide us in order to keep our democracy strong. The core of our work is bringing together experts and practitioners from across the political spectrum and with a diversity of knowledge and experiences to make recommendations, consensus-based recommendations, around safeguarding both constitutional rights and civil liberties. Our work is organized around two major programs. Our criminal justice program looks at constitutional issues associated with the right to counsel for criminal defendants who cannot afford a lawyer, sentencing reforms, criminal discovery reforms, and administration of the death penalty. Our rule of law program examines threats that we face, particularly in a post-9/11 world, and that arise out of our government's counterterrorism policies and practices. We focus on issues such as privacy, including government searches, location tracking, and surveillance, checks and balances within and among our branches of government, and most relevant for our topic today, treatment of suspected terrorists. This conference comes at an important moment. In April of this year, the Constitution Project's bipartisan task force on detainee treatment released a comprehensive report that examined the United States treatment of suspected terrorists during the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. The distinguished 11-member task force was co-chaired by Asa Hutchinson, Undersecretary for Border and Transportation Security at the Department of Homeland Security during the Bush administration, and a former Republican congressman from Arkansas. His fellow co-chair was James Jones, former ambassador to Mexico, and a Democratic congressman from Oklahoma. Task force members spent 2 years conducting a thorough review of detainee treatment policies and practices, including the role of medical professionals in interrogation operations and managing hunger strikes. They made a series of recommendations designed to safeguard against a return to the tragic abuses and mistakes in the aftermath of 9/11, and to ensure adherence to health professional principles of ethics in the context of both interrogations and managing hunger strikes. An abridged version of our task force report is available outside. The full version can be downloaded online at detaineetaskforce.org. Our task force report was followed up by the release in November of a separate but related report. The Institute on Medicine as a Profession and the Open Society Foundations convened a task force on preserving medical professionalism in national security detention centers. The IMAP task force was charged with examining what was known about the involvement of health professionals in inflictions of torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment of detainees in U.S. custody, and determining how such deviations from professional standards and ethically proper conduct occurred. The IMAP task force similarly made recommendations aimed at remediating the participation of health professionals in detainee abuse. Those studies and their findings and recommendations provide important context for today's conference, and in many ways the conference is an outgrowth of that essential work. But the 4 panels we're about to kick off and the discussions that I hope they'll generate focus on a more narrow, forward-looking question. How can we make certain that the men who remain at Guantanamo are receiving proper ethical medical care and that military health professionals have the support they need to provide it? Over the last 6 months, we've seen much welcome renewed energy and effort on the part of the Obama administration to bring down the detainee population at Guantanamo as a necessary step towards closing the prison. The Senate also recently signaled its support for those efforts through a bipartisan vote to give the administration additional flexibility to transfer detainees out, including the ability to bring detainees here to the United States for emergency or critical medical care that can't be provided on base. Momentum towards closing Guantanamo is building, yet as of this morning, 164 men remain detained there. 15 are listed by the Defense Department as hunger strikers and have been approved for force feeding. Overall, the detainees are an aging population and their medical issues are increasing in scope and complexity. The United States is responsible for providing people in our custody with proper ethical medical care. As long as Guantanamo remains open, what that means and how to ensure provision of such care are issues with which our country and the medical profession in particular will have to grapple. And we're incredibly fortunate to have such a distinguished and expert group here this morning with us to do just that. So thanks again to each of you for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Jerry Thompson.
I guess we have to speak from up here since we're on camera. Scott, thanks very much. I think as we recognize appreciation today, we certainly want to underline our gratitude for the efforts of Scott Ream, who really had a great deal to do with wiring this whole conference together, and also the staff of the Constitution Project, and particularly its distinguished president, Virginia Sloan, who I understand will join us here today. I just wanted to take a brief few moments to underline a perspective. This is an important conference. We all know that. It's important certainly for its significance with respect to understanding the medical care given detainees at Guantanamo Bay. That's importance in itself. But it's questions and issues that will be raised in this regard also reflect on other venues and settings in which physicians and other health professionals provide care in institutions and organizations and as their agents that test their commitments to medical ethics and professionals. I think it's fair to say that as the covenant between medicine and society proceeds or has proceeded, it's been increasingly guided, that is the medical care outcome, by medical ethics, and over the last several decades, by the development and inclusion of standards of professionalism, particularly for physicians. Society expects its physicians and all its health professionals to abide by these principles as they deliver care, to abide by them wherever and whenever they serve, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the institutions and agencies for which they serve. It also expects, interestingly enough, that the settings and the institutions and organizations in which physicians provide care and are agents for the provision of care abide by those same standards of professionalism, if you will, patients first, and certainly ethical standards. And we fret, I think it's fair to say again, that we fret about, particularly in this country, whether the care given is appropriate, of high quality, and guided by medical ethical principles. And we fret about that with respect to the individual practitioners, for physicians, no question about that. But we're also concerned, obviously, that the institutions themselves, the organizations for which they serve, even group practices, have the same principles of professionalism and commitment to medical ethics, quality and appropriateness of care. And that's certainly reflected by the complexity of review in this country. Not only are physicians reviewed constantly with respect to these standards, but the institutions are held to account. Joint Commission, healthcare organizations, the CMMS, variety of state regulations and laws requiring that the institutions regard and hold by those same tenets. And all of them require that physicians, as organized medical staff, be part of that satisfaction of the commitment to quality and medical ethical care. We're talking today about medical care at Guantanamo. And there are problems come up. This certainly needs attention, no question about it. That's why we're all here. We're worried about it. Guantanamo is going to go eventually. But these questions and issues will persist unless the light is turned on and something is done about it. They certainly will persist with the next urgency, the next creation of prisoners of war or detainees or whatever. We have to pay attention to these issues and help society and medicine understand their importance and their implications. I think if we ignore this flashing issue because of ignorance or neglect, we may see perhaps that vector, which is the resultant of the medical profession's commitment, concern for care, and society's commitment as well. We may begin to see that vector shift in direction, perhaps change in intensity or power. And unfortunately, that could be the beginning of a different kind of medicine for us and for those who follow. Last comment, this is an outstanding room. It is just tremendous. Many scholars, students of the situation, activists, and we're all looking forward to today's discussion. I think those of us who have been in the kitchen, so to speak, and helping to try and put this together, recognize that the real ignition for this conference belongs to two real veterans of the concerns that we're discussing here today and champions of proper care in detention settings. I'm talking about George Annis and Sandra Crosby. And now I'm going to turn this over to George.
Okay, I want to thank Scott, obviously, and Jerry, and all of you for being here today. I'm just going to take a few minutes to, you all know about the Constitution Project and highly respect it. Are these on? Okay. Is it on? Yes, sir. Okay. And we're delighted to be working with them. I want to talk about global lawyers and physicians for just a couple of minutes, because I'm sure none of you have ever heard of us. And if you have, you probably don't know what we're about. But Scott introduced the Constitution Project and talked about it being bipartisan. We're bipartisan in a kind of different way. We try to bring doctors and lawyers together to work in the area of human rights. And as I've said many times, we deserve the Nobel Peace Prize if we can pull this off. Historically, doctors and lawyers obviously haven't worked together all that well. This is a project of my department, the Department of Health Law, Bioethics, and Human Rights at Boston University, and it was initiated in 1996, like a long time ago, when we did a conference at the Holocaust Memorial Museum on the 50th anniversary of the doctor's trial. And the insight that we got at that conference was that it required doctors and lawyers to actually work together to successfully prosecute the Nazi doctors and to articulate even the Nuremberg principles, which we're all familiar with and which undergird this conference and many others, that there are such things as war crimes and crimes against humanity, that individuals can be held personally accountable for committing them, and that the excuse I was just obeying orders is not an excuse. This is my colleague Michael Groden, the doctor in the group. I'm the lawyer in the group, and I'm very pleased Dr. Groden's here with us today as well. So that began this. I want to acknowledge 4 of our founding members who are all deceased and would be here. You're all familiar with, I'm sure, at least 3 of the 4, and it'll be a different 3 for each of you. Ed Pellegrino, Jay Katz, Bob Drinan, and Jonathan Mann. Jonathan actually was the one, the founder of the Health and Human Rights Movement, who encouraged us to start an NGO at Boston University School of Public Health. At the time, Harvard was the only university that had its own NGO. Now it's Harvard and Boston University. I don't think a lot of other ones have done that. In April of 2004, we convened the first conference at BU on Guantanamo a long time ago. Our colleague Daryl Matthews, who had left BU but taught with us for many years, was one of the first civilians who was brought to Guantanamo to examine, in his case he's a forensic psychiatrist, to examine the mental health care at Guantanamo in 2003. And Daryl came to our conference to report on things. He said there were some things he couldn't discuss. He was under a security protocol about certain things he can't discuss. A number of our speakers today are under similar security protocols. So when people say, I can't discuss that, that doesn't mean they don't know about it, but it does mean literally they've agreed they can't discuss it. The reason this meeting, or one reason this meeting is in this room, one reason I wanted it in this room, was that almost 7 years ago, in this room, the Institute of Medicine, at the instigation of the Human Rights Committee of the National Academies, held a workshop, one-day workshop on military medical ethics. And all the questions that we're going to examine today were examined then. And I think it's fair to say, how many of you were there at that meeting? I know a lot of you were. I don't want to keep the same people over and over again. But I think it's fair to say, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that nobody who was at that meeting thought that 6 years from then we'd still be discussing the same issues, that they wouldn't have been resolved, that there were many people from the Department of Defense who participated in that meeting and said, we're going to make this right, we're going to get medical ethics solidly entrenched at Guantanamo, et cetera. Of course, shortly after that was the pledge that Guantanamo would be closed within a year, and that took a lot of the pressure off of many of these issues. But nonetheless, that was a seminal event here. I don't think I have to say, but I will say, because of some of the politics of this meeting, that the Institute of Medicine is not a sponsor of this meeting. It was a sponsor of that one, and we don't want to confuse that. In April of this year, the Committee on Human Rights of the National Academies, which, as you all know, is the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine, their committee, our committee, the Committee on Human Rights, co-sponsored with GLP, a closed meeting here on the hunger strike issue to try to move the discussion along. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was that there should be another meeting, only a public meeting, to keep this discussion going. This meeting should be, but is not, for technical reasons, political reasons, co-sponsored by our committee, the Committee on Human Rights of the National Academies, although, as our chairman has put it, we're the catalyst. And apparently it's okay to say we're the catalyst of this meeting. Out of that meeting came this article, which is in your materials, on June 12th. The day after that, Dr. Lazarus wrote his own piece in the British Medical Journal, and we were hoping that we're reaching a tipping point at that point. The detainee treatment material, which you have a summary in your materials, was published shortly after our meeting. We had nothing to do with that. But again, it brought attention to the issue. This report was published early last month, and talk about politics again. From the Institute of Medicine as a profession, some journalists confuse the Institute on Medicine with the Institute of Medicine, and the IOM took great, well, they weren't happy. But this is not this is not with the Institute of Medicine, obviously. As my colleague Michael Groden taught me, he's an expert on the Holocaust. He once said to me, you know, there's no politics like Holocaust politics. And since I'm an academic, I know there's no politics like academic politics. But what I didn't know until last month was there's actually no politics like the National Academy of Sciences politics either. I don't know anything about that. I think that's clear from what I've already told you. So today's meeting is I think, an important one. It's a medical meeting. I would say, though, it did take lawyers to get the doctors to come here, but this is not about the law. This meeting is about medicine. We facilitate it, I guess, as my friend Sid Verba, the chairman of the Committee on Human Rights, would say, we're catalyzed it. But we really, really, really want this meeting to be about medical practice and medical ethics, and that's what it's about. And how, I think Jerry put it extremely well, how important this is to everybody. It's not just to the prisoners at Guantanamo, although obviously it's important to them. It's to prisoners everywhere in the United States, everywhere in the world, I would say. But more than that even. It's important to everyone in a doctor-patient relationship, everywhere. It's about trust, it's about medical practice, and it's about medical ethics, what our patients can and should expect. In reviewing this back in 2007, again, just before the meeting here in the lecture hall, Michael Moore's documentary, Sicko, was released. And as you may or may not recall, one of the centerpieces of his documentary was medical care at Guantanamo. And he interviewed a number of the doctors out there, and they all said they get the best, they didn't quite say the best medical care in the world, but they said they get medical care comparable to medical care in the United States. And they were very proud of that, and Michael Moore didn't question it at all. He's a skeptical guy, but he didn't question that at all. But no one, I think, none of the doctors who were in that specialty, and even Michael Moore, again, would have thought that 7 years later we'd still be talking about what happens at Guantanamo. So this is the structure of the conference. I'm sure you've seen it in your materials. This morning, we're going to look at 2 case studies that are going to raise the specific issue. What kind of medical care is being provided at Guantanamo? And apparently this has to be done, again, because the allegation or the claim is always made that you're getting very good, if not excellent, medical care. Okay? This afternoon, we'll look a little bit at prison hunger strikes because that's become the major issue. But the biggest, the most important panel, I don't want not to take anything away from anybody's other panels, is the final panel of the day, which is to talk about practical approaches to change practice. Obviously, that assumes we do have to change practice, but I think once you